The clocks multiply when cowards run out of words. Mara woke to the sound of a lullaby played on a single held note. The bridge was a night sea of screens, and the deck hum stroked her boots like the breath of a patient animal. Karsk Gate's beacons strobed pale on the forward glass, a heartbeat too regular to be human. She rubbed her eyes until the grit made sense. "Report," she said, and her tongue tasted like old tea and copper. "Karsk doctrine elements have seeded a 20-minute timer," Sorrel said, voice low to match watch tone. "They added a clause: any officer who fails to execute the ultimatum loses voting rights for a cycle." "They're moving the punishment inward," Cade said, jaw tight. "They're punishing conscience." Mara's throat tightened. "They think fear keeps the line. We'll show them that fear shakes it." "Fear looks like order right up until it doesn't." Argo's cone brightened a shade. "Admiral, there's more. 2 private freight syndicates have offered to reroute around Karsk at triple fee. They call it prudent logistics. Predators scent blood whenever a doctrine spills it slow," Mara said. "We hold the road anyway." Sensory anchors coalesced into the moment. The faint citrus the filters still insisted on mixing into the air. The fine crackle from a tired status panel that had survived 3 campaigns and enjoyed complaining. The distant clang of a dropped tool 2 decks down, followed by Benton's voice swearing with affection at a trainee. "Civilian minute," Mara said, and Argo obliged. On the Farmhab Grainer Tidehouse, 2 brothers in grease-stiff overalls stood with their foreheads touching, counting out loud the seconds between beacon pulses. They weren't religious, but the rhythm felt like a prayer. Their mother slipped a sugar-candied peel of orange into each of their mouths. "For luck," she said, "and because the nurse on Farrell says it makes the ship smell like a kinder planet." We set, Sorrel asked when the minute returned. "Set," Mara said. "We do not sprint. We cadence." Argo. "I want flash corridors that flick open and close like a blinking eye." Cade weave decoys that mimic emergency braking in front of their pickets. Parsa prepare paint shots on their clocks, not their guns. Sorrel show me which domestic feeds in Karsk's system get the most eyes at mealtime. "We'll talk in kitchens," Sorrel said, "and in schoolrooms. Your lessons land best where children eat and learn." Ultimatum, clock 00-1903 blinked into life on every hull inside Karsk's sphere. The numerals pulsed faster than at Newport, a lie about urgency that trusted people to be too tired to argue. "Open to Prefect Yal," Mara said. He appeared drawn but alert, as if sleep had tapped his shoulder and found him already awake. "Admiral," he said, and the way he said it suggested the word had learned respect inside his mouth. "You're persistent. You're pivoting," Mara said. "You've cut the time and turned punishment inward. You believe you can scare your officers into silence." "I believe in discipline," Yaal said. "A fleet must hold one line. A line held by fear bends, ugly," Mara said. "It breaks behind the eyes." A static line snaps invisibly long before the rope looks frayed. Sorrel flicked a set of icons. "Flash corridors online," she said. "Argo. I'm layering a rhythm on the open-close sequence, a pattern people can feel without reading it. Like a song," Argo said. "I will hum it across the convoy." Lights winked along a path like firefly ossus testing evening air. The convoy shifted to match the melody no one admitted they were hearing. Doctrine pickets tried to box the blink, but each close found them grasping empty starlight. Their clocks kept pulsing hungry. "Broadcast to Karsk domestic," Mara said. "Plain language." Argo's voice carried in markets and mess halls. "Public notice non-combatant convoy under protection. No first fire from either side." A vote at Newport showed crew's value proportion. We ask Karsk to consider whether sealing gates for a year helps children eat. Doctrine counters, Sorrel said. They call us manipulators. Overlay the medical inventory we carry, Mara said. Let a father see a list and recognize a vial his son needs. Numbers aren't manipulation. When they come with labels, your hands know a civilian breath before the set turn. On the school barge Kepler's Swarm, a teacher named Ina turned the timer graphics into a math lesson because fear crawled slower when it had a name. If the clock starts at 20, she said, and we spend 2 to breathe and 4 to listen, how many remain to choose? The children shouted numbers that chased each other around their tongues. A boy with a scar down his shin fall on a ladder last season asked if choosing was math. Always, Ina said. But the answer isn't always a number. Escalation, Cade reported softly. They're spiking directed static through our flash corridors. They want to jam the rhythm. Seed sync beacons inside the convoy, Sorrel said. If they cut the external, we carry the beat. Doing it, Argo said, amusement threaded through its tone. You are all becoming very good at music. Paint shot, Parsa announced. Request permission. Approved, Mara said. One sliver on the clock face of Picket B-43. The gun kissed. A thin needle of light flicked across the doctrine timer like a finger smudging lipstick. The numerals held, but the scar marred their perfection. On Karsk domestic feeds, the image looped. A child laughed at the paint. A captain frowned and looked down at his hands. Make their icons bleed just enough to prove they're human, Prefect, Mara said on the open channel. You changed your doctrine to punish conscience. That's not discipline. It's terrified arithmetic. He didn't reply. His jaw worked. Argo murmured, he is receiving messages not meant for us. Some call him brave. Some call him a clerk with a sword. Offer him a ladder, Mara said. People climb if you make the rungs close, drafting Argo said. In light of crew sentiment measured at Newport, a temporary suspension of punitive clauses demonstrates confidence rather than weakness. Send, Mara said. The easiest way down from a bad hill is the one that saves your face. Ultimatum clock 0:14:21. Doctrine is shifting pickets to compress the flash corridor bandwidth, Sorrel said. They'll choke us slow. Decoy brakes, Mara ordered. Throw a dozen fake emergency stops ahead of their heavy ships. Make inertia their problem. Cade's hands moved like a card sharp's. Pods burst and threw honest-looking ghosts that slammed invisible heels down hard. Doctrine heavies bled thrust to avoid collisions that never existed. On domestic feeds, slow-motion replays watched big gray hulls stumble. The effect was ridiculous, and the ridiculous humbles doctrines faster than reason. Ridicule is a mirror. Doctrine can't bear to watch a civilian breath on refuge. 9 Olo slid another tray of bread from the weld oven, with hands wrapped in rags. The heat haloed his face pink. Tell me if the rhythm changes, he called to his wife, who had begun to clap on beats she felt through deck plates. Their boy smiled despite himself and clapped too. When the timer pulsed faster, they clapped slower to spite it. Admiral Argo said a secured burst from a doctrine lieutenant named Gunn. He requests anonymity. He says 5 of his crew will lose voting rights for refusing to fire the warning shots at Newport. He says they are fathers, and one is a daughter whose mother taught at a Karsk primary. Ask permission to paraphrase the situation publicly with all identifiers scrubbed, Mara said. Offer him a copy of the words before we speak them. Permission granted, Argo said a breath later. He asked me to include the part where his daughter's teacher still keeps a picture of the planet's first sunrise in her classroom. Say that part twice, Mara said. and a lump the size of a gilt swallowed her voice for a moment. Your heroics don't matter if they don't touch a classroom wall. Ultimatum clock 00:10:59. Set piece 3, Sorrel said. They're prepping a rapid seal cascade. If it fires, it freezes this gate for 13 months. They'll call it a safety refurb. Their feeds are priming the word reckoning. Flip it, Mara said. Plan Cade asked, too eager, too young not to grin at puzzles. Make a public tally of the convoy's perishable mass and time to spoil under seal, Mara said. Embed the metric where their seal code will call its own returns. When Y'all's cascade runs, it will pull up the cost next to the action. He can push confirm with the price on the same line. Argo whistled a thin, appreciative tone. We can anchor signatures to the seal code so the log shows which officer accepted the bill. Make the font big, Mara said. Readable by a grandmother at arm's length. Make the cost easy to read with tired eyes, the numbers populated. Grain by tonnage, filtrate by hour, isotope half-lives by dose. School fabricator inventory measured in the number of desks and water filters they could print before the shelf date ticked past useful. Add one more line, Mara said, and Sorrel looked up, tracking her mind. Add bread loaves equivalent. Bread loaves. Cade frowned. We do not measure hunger only by kilojoules, Mara said. We measure hunger by what a child knows as bread. Yes, Admiral Sorrel said, already typing. Doctrine is pushing a legal brief, Argo said suddenly. They're citing a revised corridor note permitting unilateral seal for restorative calibration. The brief makes you the reason, except that, Mara said. We don't mind being a cause if the effect is visible. Respond with Compact Article 7 again. Add Newport vote tallies as moral precedent. Transmitting, Argo said. Their domestic feeds are arguing in real time with themselves. A civilian breath. On the Pilgrim hull, Trinae blessing Father Lon stopped to tie a child's shoe while parents argued in whispers about whether to put their kid in a suit. The laces were stiff from laundry. He moistened them with his breath and worked the knot easy. The child giggled at the tickle. You're safe, the priest said, and didn't add for now, because truth is gentlest where it is least qualified. Admiral Parsa said, Do you want the main battery at half, Fomo? We may need to shave shots if they push into us. Keep it cold, Mara said, but warm the coils as if we plan to shoot. Their sensors must see we have teeth we choose not to use. Half-warm Parsa echoed, and the rails began to hum softly. The note slid under the deck's bass thrum and found a dissonant harmony that set Mara's molars buzzing. Scare them with your capacity, not your waste. Ultimatum clock 00:08:22. The seal cascade began to arm. Symbols bloomed like frost across a dark window. Ya'al's face reappeared, the lines carved deeper. I can't let you break every gate, he said. If I do nothing, the guilds will shove their carts through our halls and call it victory. Then do something that isn't harm, Mara said. Suspend punitive doctrine for review. Set an inquiry with open seats for civilians. Show your world that gates are kept by those who remember who needs them. You keep asking me to be a statesman when my job is to be a cop, he said. And the admission came out sad. Find a cop who can be a statesman for an hour, Mara said. Borrow his badge. Borrow courage if you haven't grown yours yet. Argo murmured, Seal code is calling the cost table. The line you added is leading every replay. Bread loaves equivalent is a persuasive column. On Karsk, a woman at a kitchen counter froze with a knife halfway through a cabbage as her wall showed a gate control panel next to a count of bread. On the school barge, Ina pointed and didn't have to say anything. The children said it for her. That's a lot of bread, one breathed, and the number made the clock look like a bully. Escalation, Sorrel warned. Picket C-19 moved without orders. Their captain intends to bump the convoy physically. A public shove. Paint shot, Mara said. One kiss on his bow. Make his navigator feel a warning in his wrist bones. Parsa obliged. The beam grazed like a cat's paw. The shove planned became a guilty hesitation. In shame's wake, people often find prudence. Shame is a bad teacher, but a quick one. Ultimatum clock 0611. Argo Mara said, open a vote again. Same as Newport. Add one line. Should punitive clauses stripping voting rights for refusing to fire be suspended, pending inquiry? Posted, Argo said. Anonymous hashes anchored. Responses flowing. The number is not close. 81% yes. Publish, Mara said, and her voice cracked a little and no one mentioned it. We don't need unanimity. We need enough to make silence impossible. Yal stared at the tallies as if they were a constellation he should recognize and couldn't from this angle. Your mirrors are everywhere, he said. You make my ship feel like a forum. Ships were always forums, Mara said. You just put the questions behind doors with locks. Admiral Sorrel said cost lines 2 of our flash corridor nodes burned hot and popped. No harm, but smoke. Crew reported lightheadedness before ventilation kicked faster. Recommending Node Deck 7 be repainted after we scrub. Logged with names, Mara said. Send a crate of ginger candies down there to settle stomachs. Write Admiral on the lid like a grandmother. Caring is cheaper than repairs and twice as strong. The seal cascade paused at 91%. The panel waited for a thumb. Prefect Argo said in a voice as gentle as a hand on a fevered brow. Your crews have spoken. Your public has counted. Your doctrine has learned something it did not plan to. Do not teach them to ignore their own voices. Yal's hand hovered over the confirm. A long breath moved his chest. When he spoke, it was to his people. Suspend punitive clauses, he said. Open an inquiry in light of fleet sentiment. Do not seal Karsk Gate. Hold. Hold is a good word when it saves rather than stalls. A cheer moved like a weather front through cargo bays and messes. On Feral, Nurse Jo San laughed and spilled orange peel and didn't care. On Tidehouse, the brothers let their foreheads fall apart and said rude things about hammers that tried to be laws. Cost lines, Sorrel said. One burned to a hand when a junior tried to catch a falling conduit clamp. He succeeded and cursed and will have a scar that makes a good story. EW emitters at 70% wear. We will need a yard visit sooner than planned. We'll make it a public tour, Mara said. Let kids touch rails that saved their bread. The best glory lives where little hands leave fingerprints are. Mara said softly, fatigue settling like a coat. Make the after brief strict. We did well. We also got lucky where we made luck. I want lessons written in noon language and a list of things we can do with fewer miracles. It will be tedious, Argo said with something like affection. Tedium keeps people alive, Mara said. A civilian breath before the last turn. On Little Hark Shiv untied the small girl's wrist knot and retied it looser. Not so tight now, she said. We won't need to show it as often. The girl nodded as if told a secret that tasted like honey, and Shiv pocketed the knot rag to wash and fold later because keeping small cloths ready was a kind of faith. Prefect Yal requests a private aside, Argo said. Give him a minute, Mara said, and the bridge listeners turned their eyes to their screens because eavesdropping is impolite even when it's easy. He appeared smaller without the audience glow. You hurt me, he said, but there was no accusation in it. And you helped me. Both are true. Then remember both, Mara said. One keeps you humble. The other keeps you kind. Your phrase, he said, glancing down as if reading words that had marked him about teaching by numbers and remembering by ledgers, never by collars. That's what I'll propose as the inquiry's center. I'd like the ledger part to be public, Mara said, even when it hurts you. It will, he said. It should. Admission is a key more than it is a whip, Admiral Sorrel said when the channel closed routing options. We can peel off and throw a shadow at Sev Gate while the doctrine is winded. No, Mara said. We do not chase to claim trophies. We escort until the last hull with bread is under a sun that makes gardens. You'll be called soft, Cade said, half teasing now that the blood surge was ebbing. I've been called worse by friends on my birthday, Mara said. The bridge eased from taut to alert. The air smelled like hot plastic, cooling a scent that always made Mara think of fireworks after a city parade. The deck hum relaxed into something the body could call ordinary. She felt every muscle discover its existence again. Argo, Mara said, start drafting the institutional consequence we ask for. The inquiry should end with doctrine requirements. No more unilateral clocks longer than a minute for non-combatant corridors. Mandatory public tallies for punitive clauses. A standing civilian seat with veto on gate seals. A ledger line showing cost in units called bread. I'll write it in stone that forgets faces slowly, Argo said, and in screens that remember them quickly. Make habits that make it harder to do harm quietly. They shepherded the convoy through Karsk like a festival procession that knew how to disguise joy as caution. At the mouth of the inner lanes, ships peeled off with a flash of lights that said thanks in a dozen dialects. A courier boat painted a crude heart on their hull with a beam set to harmless and fled before Parsa could pretend to scold. Final cost lines, Sorrel said when the last straggler drifted on. 2 emitters cooked beyond repair. 3 we can salvage with new plates. 5 minor burns. 0 dead. 0 lost hulls. Rail capacitors overdue for overhaul by 2 weeks. We owe 6 favors to quartermasters who held their nerves and our rhythm. We'll pay in soup and public thanks, Mara said. And in 1 repair berth named for Gunnar Ide, because he did the work no one praises, and we like to praise the right boring things. Praise what keeps you boringly alive. Cade drummed his fingers, a nervous habit he never shook. Admiral, can I ask? He stopped, embarrassed by his own eagerness. Can I ask if you believe this? Lasts, the inquiry, the votes. Won't some new prefect come and promise a simpler story? With stiffer penalties, he will, Mara said. And when he does, we'll show him the ledger, and we'll have a generation of children who remember bread columns and votes that kept gates open. You can't make people forget that easily. It sticks to the mouth, like ginger candies, Parsa said from her station, half a smile playing at her mouth. Exactly, Mara said. The sweet thing you remember outlasts the bitter law you forget. Argo softened its voice to a low velvet. Admiral, the inquiry convenes in 4 days by Karsk standard. They have asked for you to submit a summary of events and your recommended reforms. They asked to cite our phrase as a footnote in their charter. Submit, Mara said. Plain words. No gloating. Include the names of the burned crew and the list of the repairs. Victories without prices make bad precedents. They will ask for a speech, Sorrel said. Send them soup, Mara said, and a 3-sentence statement. They can fill the rest with what they saw. A civilian breath before the last page turned. On Refuge 9, Olo cut the first loaf of bread with a battered knife that had seen weddings and wakes. He handed pieces to his wife and son and 3 strangers who'd helped clap the rhythm. The crumbs steamed, The air smelled like everything an argument should end in. Argomara said, "Set us to half watch. I want crews sleeping on real pillows for a change." "I will sing them to it with ship noise," Argo said. "Not too loud, with the deck hum as the bass. Rest is a duty, not a reward." She stood alone a moment at the forward glass. Karsk's halo pulsed gentler now that no one was trying to use it as a cudgel. Her breath fogged the pane and left a little crescent where her lips had touched it. She let her forehead rest there a count of 4 seconds, then lifted it before the ritual turned into a habit she would resent. The ship creaked the way old houses do when weather shifts outside a sleeping town. Somewhere 2 decks down, someone laughed at a joke about rails and cats. Somewhere 3 decks up, Benton cussed with pride when a coil settled into a seat, like a stubborn king accepting a better throne. The smells found harmony again: citrus filter, sweat turned to salt metal, cooling a ghost of orange peel from a pocket. Admiral Argo said so softly, she almost didn't hear, "Do you want the last line drafted?" "I want to say it myself," she said. "When it's time." "Then I'll keep the ship quiet," Argo said, and did. The quiet after a lesson is when people decide what they learned. 4 days later, by Karsk time, the inquiry mounted in a public hall big enough for a small ship to dock inside. They hung the old banners and a new one that was just a simple ledger page blank, daring them to fill it with something besides excuses. Yal stood where the accused and the righteous stand together when the point isn't punishment, and he read a statement that had more contrition than his rank liked, and more spine than many expected. Mara watched on a little screen, chewing on a ginger candy until the heat bit her tongue, and eyes watered for reasons she would not explain. The vote passed by a margin that would have looked like a miracle if they hadn't done the math in public before. Punitive clauses stripped out. Gate seals barred without a civilian veto. Unilateral clocks capped at 1 minute on non-combatant lines and subject to immediate review. Bread columns added to every cost ledger. A small line at the bottom. "This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars." Precedent set, Argo said. Recorded on the public ledger of Karsk's system and mirrored to 7 polities. The doctrine's privileges rescinded in part. The rest under review. "Send flowers," Mara said. "Big ugly ones that smell like dirt. Some victories should look like work, not like fireworks." She walked the ship that evening, putting her hand on frames and rails, letting the deck hum find her knee, her hip, the old wound behind her shoulder blade. She never mentioned because it wasn't interesting. Crew nodded and pretended not to notice she was out to be seen, which is how respect wears itself in good homes. She stopped in Node Deck 7 and handed out ginger candies and laughed when Benton called them bribes and demanded 2. At the end, she returned to the bridge. The glass was cool. The stars were busy pretending to be still. She thought about kneeling and about rituals that keep you on your feet. She thought about clocks and how easily they bully and how quickly they look foolish when someone draws a bread column next to them. She thought about Prefect Yaal's face when he saw his vote tally and realized his crews had not failed him by speaking. They had saved him by forcing him to be better than his worst habit. She asked Argo for a minute with an open mic. The fleet listened because they always did not because they had to. "I have a small speech," she said. "Smaller than the ginger candies you've been stealing from my stores. I'll keep it under 120 words, and then we'll go back to keeping gates and washing our hands before we eat bread. We taught in public, and we paid what we owed in heat and plates and burns with names. We refused to let an ultimatum make us liars about who we are. We showed a man that changing in front of his people can be called honor if he does it fast enough. We left receipts where grandmothers could read them. That's the work. It will be boring tomorrow and necessary the day after. Keep your rituals. Teach first." If you must fight, fight like a mirror that refuses to lie. I'm proud. Now sleep. She set her palm on the rail, felt the paint cool against skin, and looked once more at Karsk's halo, which had dimmed to a clean pewter ring, while the public tally on the hall wall confirmed, and the mirror arrays exhaled their heat into shadow. We keep the road open, and the account true. The clock they hid was written under skin. Karsk's inquiry had not even cooled when Argo's quiet tone found Mara's shoulder again. The deck hum remembered tension like a muscle that had learned a dance. The filters breathed citrus and ship sweat, and the glass tasted of old fog when she leaned too close. Report, she said, and swallowed the ginger heat that still lived in her mouth. Doctrine dissenters have forked, Sorrel answered. A hardline splinter calling itself the Vigil has issued their own clocks at Sev and Orin. 5-minute ultimatums, private beams, no public tallies. They're hiding the timer inside the barrel, Cade muttered. Mara felt a fatigue like wet wool and stood anyway. We make them visible or we make them stop. First choice is better. If you can't see the countdown, it is counting you. They turned for Sev. Karsk's halo dwindled until it fit in a hand. The convoy thinned as ships peeled for promised suns. Tidehouse signaled gratitude with a burst of kitchen noise and bread steam on a low-band channel that tasted like a story older than doctrine. The bridge lights dropped to watch tone. A panel crackled complaint until Benton thumped its frame with the exact kindness needed to persuade metal. Civilian minute, Mara said, and Argo obliged. On the school barge, Kepler's swarm. Ina washed chalk dust from her fingers in recycled water that smelled faintly of rust and lemon. Homework, she told her class, who groaned like a chorus of small storms. Write what bread means to you. A boy asked if he could draw instead. Of course, she said, and watched the line of his pencil look like a road. Sev's traffic, Sorrel said, when the minute returned is mostly miners' boats and a hospital tender. The Vigil's clock wraps the tender like a noose and asks the system to watch or kneel. They always choose a stage, Mara said. Argo scrape their engine logs before they close. Cade give me decoys that look like evacuations but aren't. Parsa keep the main cold and the paint warm. Sorrel map me the kitchens and schoolrooms again. We have them marked, Sorrel said dryly. Might as well tattoo them. Tattoo the map on your hands so you can't drop it. Ultimatum clock 0 or 59 blossomed at Sev like frost on old glass. It didn't broadcast to the public feeds. It only lived in the Vigil's sights and their private boast. Argo hauled it into daylight with a hook flung into the network's quiet backbone. The timer hit the big screens in bars and clinics half a beat later, and the noise that followed sounded like metal pans dropping and children saying what in voices that learned too soon. They'll call that hacking, Cade said. They'll call it a miracle if we're lucky, Mara said. We'll call it air. Truth behaves like oxygen when you've been breathing smoke. The Vigil spoke with a voice that liked knives. Kneel or we cut the hospital loose, it said, on a clean band trying to be theatrical. Your fleet's mirrors won't save you when the blade is inside the hand. Then open the fist, Mara murmured. Argo, show me their command spine. Nested in their fire control, Argo replied. If we paint the spine with harmless light, their own kill switch will flag a misfire. They'll have to remove safety to proceed. Paint, Mara said. Parsa's thread kissed the Vigil's backbrain. Alarms chirped in their private rooms where men liked to feel safe and important. Killing became a two-step process. Some killers cannot survive having to think between. Thinking saves more lives than any sword. Before the first push, they took breath for the people in the sights. On the Sev tender blue Ansible nurse IE wiped down a bed rail with a cloth that smelled of pine and old ship. Her hands were chapped from sanitizer and years. She tucked a loose curl behind her ear and said to the empty air, "We are not leaving, and we are not spectacular. We wash our hands and count our drips and label our tubes, and that is how you beat a clock." "Escalation," Sorrel said softly. "The Vigil cut safeties. They mean to prove they aren't y'all." "They're worse," Cade said, not hiding the tremor under steel. "They're frightened people in love with control," Mara said. "That love makes them cruel. Will make them busy. Make their hands so full they can't grip a knife, flash corridors," Sorrel called. "We can open a maze around the tender that only the tender can read. If the Vigil pushes, they'll trip their friends." "They don't have friends," Cade said. "They have peers who don't want to look stupid," Sorrel replied. "Open the maze," Mara said. "Broadcast the key to the public feeds. If the Vigil pursues, their viewers will see them choose clumsy." Argo hummed a melody. Sev civilians unconsciously matched their steps to it in market aisles and clinic halls. The tender pivoted with the confidence of a practiced nurse turning in a tight room. The Vigil pickets swore through gritted teeth. "Ridicule comes before reform when pride is the wall." Ultimatum clock 000317. "Vigil is spiking their beams," Sorrel reported. "Short mean bursts. They want scratches to call wins." "Paint their clocks again," Mara said. "Enough to smudge their mirrors. Nothing that scorches a face." Parsa's beam nicked a timer and left an ugly scar on a holy object. In a bar on Sev, someone laughed hard enough to spill beer. In a kitchen, a grandmother clucked and shook her head at foolish boys. Argo Mara said, "Drop a prompt inside their crew's wardrooms. One question. Do you consider cutting a hospital loose an honorable action? Anonymize. Anchor hashes. Publish tallies by unit." "Posted," Argo said. "Responses coming." "It is not close." "Show it to the Vigil's command," Mara said. "Let them watch their uniformed sons disagree. Your own men are the first mirror you should fear." "Civilian breath," Mara said, because the clock ran faster when hearts forgot food. On Blue Ansible, a porter named Meek hauled a cart of sheets down a corridor and banged his knuckles against bulkheads like a rhythm section. He kept time with the hidden melody the flash corridors taught. "We're in the song," he said to no one. "We're in the song." "Escalation 2, Sorrel said. "Vigil has a trump, a shaped charge disguised as a navigation buoy at the maze's exit. They plan to claim we ran into it," Argo Mara said evenly. "Give me its hash, its maker's signature, its purchase ledger, and the face of the clerk who sold it. Scrub nothing. Send to Sev Domestic with a caption, 'This is the buoy they meant to pretend we found.'" Argo's tone sharpened like a knife made for fruit. "Done. The lie dies when its receipt has a clerk's smile." The Vigil's clock ticked with all the subtlety of a marching band. 00158. "They're going to slam something," Cade said. "We can feel it." "They'll try to bump the tender and claim drift," Sorrel said. "Paint," Mara said. "One kiss on their bow. Make it feel like shame." Parsa's beam stroked. On the Vigil deck, a helmsman's wrist shivered against a console, and he thought of his mother's kitchen and the way she smacked the back of his hand when he grabbed the loaf before a guest. He eased off without knowing why. Sometimes you save a life by making a man remember his mother. "Ultimatum clock 001, Sun," Argo intoned. "Vote," Mara said. "One question. Seal Sev Gate for a year after a non-compliant transit with no casualties," Posted Argo said. Hash anchors in place. Tallies 89, no 9, yes, 2 abstain. Publish, Mara said. Tag the units and the kitchens. The public vote is a lock you can't pick with a gun. The vigil snapped. You cannot govern us with laughter and loaves, their voice grated fury bleeding through number. I can remind you what your uniforms are for, Mara said. They are not collars. The clock hit 003 and stayed there, arrested by the weight of watching eyes. The vigil's beams dimmed as fear of ridicule did what fear of law could not. Blue Ansible slid into the open, with a dignity anyone could see and few could argue with. Hold is a holy word when it prevents harm, cost lines, Sorrel said. Flash nodes at Sev burned hotter than Karsk. 2 popped. Ventilation swallowed smoke. 3 crew lightheaded, 1 small burn. Names logged. Benton wants praise for catching a coil before it sulked into a larger complaint. Send Benton a coil-shaped cake, Mara said, and meant it. Admiral Argo said softer, the vigil is moving to Orin. They intend to shut a gate with a private seal and claim a technical fault. We follow, Mara said. This one we close without stage. They don't want an audience. We bring one. Cowards love closed rooms, open the windows and they squint. Orin's halo flashed whitesick. The vigil seeded a minute-long clock like a stubby cigarette. Argo dragged it to the plaza screens with cruel grace. People looked up from buying noodles and changed the lines in their faces. Civilian minute, Mara said. On the noodle stand, star broth, a vendor named Nan blew on a ladle and tasted shallot and bone and star anise. Too salty, she told her nephew, then added water and said to the air, not everything improves when you add more salt. Escalation 3, Sorrel said. The vigil has a silent unit-only clock keyed into their sidearms authorization. It strips voting rights for any crew who refuses an order in the next 5 minutes. Mirror it, Mara said. But don't show their names. Show the hands. Blur the faces, leave the calluses. Caption, these are the hands you would punish for saying no. Argo obeyed. Orin kitchens went quiet. Schoolrooms did not. Children said no out loud to practice the shape, and teachers did not hush them. Sometimes you have to hear no before you can say stop. Make them a corridor, Sorrel Mara said. Not a maze, a straight line with a song so simple even a frightened man can follow it. Done, Sorrel said. Paint their clock faces, Mara said. Every 30 seconds. Not enough to blind, just enough to annoy. Parsa's beam tapped like a finger on a wristwatch during a bad sermon. Vote, Mara said. One question. Suspend sidearm punishment clause pending inquiry, posted Argo said. Tallies go lopsided. 92 yes. Publish, Mara said. Push to the vigil's wardroom walls. Your walls aren't soundproof when your men have eyes. The vigil's minute stuck at 5 seconds. Mara tasted iron in her mouth that wasn't blood, just the memory of a childhood nail held too long between teeth. She set her palm on the rail and let the deck hum, write patience into her bones. Prefect Yal, she said on a private line Argo assured was private enough. Call your worst men home. They aren't mine, Yaal replied. Not anymore. But they'll listen to you if you call them back with your own throat, Mara said. Not with doctrine's throat. Use your name. He did. His voice shook. The vigil flinched because even knives remember who forged them. The clock slipped to 0 and did nothing because enough people had looked. 0 is just a number when no one believes it. The tender at Orin passed. The halo cooled. Starbroth boiled. Costline Sorrel said. EW wear at 80. Rail capacitors due yesterday. 2 crew have coughs from smoke. One request for leave to attend an inquiry hearing as a citizen on Karsk, because she grew up there and wants to testify. Approve, Mara said. Send her with pay. She'll be better at law than any admiral. Paperwork is a kind of courage when it moves the line. They made a slow loop of outer lanes, escorting the last grainer to a mild sun that smelled like wet rock and early grass. News rode ahead of them. Inquiries convened. The vigil fractured and tried to cloak the shame in vows of purity. Argo mirrored receipts until callers stopped pretending they hadn't signed. Admiral Sorel said, "One soft watch, we've been asked to submit a path for doctrine reform across the 7. They want a single page. Stone that forgets faces slowly. Screens that remember fast." "We send one sentence and one image," Mara said. Sentence: no clocks without eyes, no punishments without votes, no seals without a civilian hand on the key. Image: a ledger with a bread column and a place for names. Done, Argo said, and the light in its cone looked like relief. Make your rules short enough to fit in a child's mouth. A last escalation came stupidly, because the last escalation often does. A disgraced vigil lieutenant took a courier and lit his own clock at a back gate to prove he wasn't what the votes said. He broadcast to no one, and then to everyone. The number was 30 seconds. He counted loud. Paint his clock, Mara said. Put a smile on it. Make it look like a silly toy. Parsa did, and the clock grinned as if it were a joke. The lieutenant stabbed the confirm and found he had made himself a clown. He cried without knowing it and turned away. Some men try to be tragic and end up ridiculous. Let them. They stood down at last in a yard that smelled like old grease and young paint. Benton kissed a coil for luck and swore at it with love. Cade fell asleep at a console and claimed later he'd been testing an ergonomic setting. Parsa wrote letters to 3 people and sent all 3. Sorrel filed after-action reports in Noon language a child could read and a court could quote. Mara walked the length of the flag bridge one last time before the night watch claimed it. She placed her fingers on the glass and watched her breath not fog because the temperature had finally found mercy. The deck hum eased her spine. The filters stopped trying to sell her citrus and offered plain clean. Argo, she said. Yes, the fleet mind answered the tone heavy with companionship, layers they had not named and didn't need to. I owe them a small speech, she said. Then I owe them quiet. Yes, Argo said. She opened a channel that touched mess halls and machine shops, cabins and bunks' kitchens where rag knots hung to dry and schoolrooms still lined with loaves drawn in pencil. We did not invent mercy, she said. We remembered it in front of a camera. We used math to make men look at their own hands and ask what they were doing with them. We paid for every lesson in heat and plates and burns with names, and we kept the receipts where grandmothers can read them. We are not better than anyone else because we stood. We are only less tempted the next time to kneel. Keep your rituals. Tie knots for scared children. Label tubes. Play a melody a convoy can follow. Teach first. Fight only when the mirror refuses to lie and your refusal would harm a child. We made a precedent today, and tomorrow it will be boring, and the day after it will be law. That's the point. She set the mic down gently, the metal of the switch cool like a coin saved for a bus fare. She looked at the yard's long lines, the rail lights dimming the new paint, drying to a dull, stubborn pewter. Then she turned once more to the bridge glass, saw the halo of a distant gate breathe, and stood with her hand on the rail, the way a woman stands in a doorway and listens to a house she loves settle. The road stays open because we count and we care.